Hear the word of the Lord first from the book of Genesis, chapter 41. This is coming right after Joseph had interpreted Pharaoh's dream about the years of plenty and the years of famine. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain on his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, "Bend the knee!" So he set him over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no one may lift his hand or his foot in all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paaneah, and he gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout the land of Egypt. Now in the 7 plentiful years the ground brought forth abundantly. So he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. He laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded it. And Joseph gathered up very much grain as the sand of the sea, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Then further from the word from the book of Isaiah, "Sing, O heavens! Be joyful, O earth, and break out into singing, O mountains, for Jehovah has comforted his people and will have mercy on his afflicted." But Zion said, "Jehovah has forsaken me, and the Lord forgotten me." Can a woman forget her nursing child and not have compassion on the son of her womb? Surely they may forget, yet I will not forget you. See, I have inscribed you on the palm of my hands. Your walls are continually before me. And finally, from New Church Teaching, from the work Arcana Celestia, and when the word mindfulness is used here, it's calling to mind in the sense of remembering, being aware of. The root word is remembering. Anyone who receives and possesses faith is constantly mindful of remembering the Lord. This is so even when he is thinking or talking about something other than him, or else when he is carrying out his public, private, or family duties, although he is not directly conscious of his mindfulness of the Lord while he is carrying them out. Indeed, mindfulness of the Lord, present in all who possess faith, governs their whole being. But that which governs their whole being is not noticed by them except when they turn their thought specifically to the matter. So today is Mother's Day, day when we stop to honor mothers, those who have served as mother figures for us. We instinctively recognize a mother's love as something unique and powerful, perhaps the closest living image that we can have on earth of the Lord's tender care for every one of us. As we think back to our mothers with appreciation, we naturally think back to the many times when they did something that was kind, saw good in us when maybe no one else did, or inspired, or guided us. As we do this, we're going to be intentionally selective about what we remember. We're not going to call up the memories of the low points of our mother's care for us. They certainly exist because only the Lord is perfect, but for a time, we're going to say, I'm not focusing on those. Far better to call up, pay attention to what is good. Today I want to talk about remembering and forgetting. What do we forget? What do we remember and pay attention to, and what leads us to do each? In our first reading today, Joseph had interpreted Pharaoh's dream and had been elevated to the second most important, powerful position in the kingdom. He'd come from 13 years of hard times. He'd been betrayed and hated by his brothers, sold as a slave, falsely accused and imprisoned. He'd been forgotten in prison by those who could have aided him. But now, 13 years later, he was free, he was married, he was prosperous, he had a community again. And we read, Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. It's curious that he named his first child literally forgetfulness. On one level, it's an important and it's a beautiful thing. He was choosing to move forward with his life rather than dwelling on the pain and dislocation that he had experienced. So that was an honorable thing to do. He was choosing to live life in the present rather than having the past pain dominate who he was. We know this is what the Lord wants. And yet at the same time, the very act of naming his child forgetfulness kind of begs the question, well, what is it that I'm trying to forget? So while he was trying to move on, he also wasn't pretending that that didn't happen. Again, that's a healthy thing. And it's also true, because of what we know of the story, that Joseph actually did harbor resentment. He hadn't quite forgotten the pain of the way his brothers treated him. And we see that in the way that he treated them when they came down. He was honorable. He didn't punish them unduly, but we could see he still had some resentment there. And it was only when he reconciled with them some years later that he was probably able to truly forget and not even call to mind anymore that he had been badly treated. And in fact, there's an incident at the very end, after Jacob had died, of the brothers saying, no, really, remember your father said to forgive us. And he was saying, it's already done. And it's the same with us. All of us have suffered pain. Pain that we don't forget because it still affects us. But we try to push it to the periphery of our lives and to see the good that the Lord brings. Maybe we're lucky enough to be able to resolve the issue as Joseph did with his brothers. But if not, the Lord promises that in time he will wipe away every tear from our eyes. There will be no more pain, nor death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There will be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. And some things are hard to forget. Some things are easy. The Lord said, a woman when she is in labor has sorrow because her hour has come. But as soon as she has given birth to the child, she no longer remembers the anguish for joy that a human being has been born into the world. Therefore you now have sorrow. But I will see you again, and your heart will rejoice, and your joy no one will take from you." If I had asked you to list the things that are easy to forget, my guess is that the pain of childbirth would not have qualified as one of the easy things. And yet it's all about contrast, isn't it? When something good comes out of a time that was hard, even though we remember the hard times, it tends to fade into the background. And women have said, if I remembered what childbirth was like, I'd never have had another child. And what they're really saying is, I think, because I've never done it, if that pain stood taller than the joy I feel in the child, I wouldn't do it again. But it's so insignificant compared to the love that I feel that it's as if I forgot it. And this is where we hope to get to in relationships. Pretty much everyone hurts us to some degree or another. But if it's a good relationship, we don't focus on the pain because the good is present in our minds. We focus on the new life in the relationship and not on the times when it didn't work so well. And we know from experience, when we have a poor interaction with someone and we start to focus on all the things that we don't like about, or just go over and over and over again on that particular action, it doesn't help anything. It just makes things worse. So just as a mother with a newborn focuses on the child that she holds, rather than the labor it took for the child to arrive, we choose what we pay attention to in relationships. Sometimes that means we need to choose to notice the pain, because you can't ever heal sometimes unless you address it. But an awful lot of times we need to make the choice to focus on what is good in the relationship. And when people talk about a mother's love, isn't that what they're so often talking about? That ability to see good in that child, even when maybe nobody else could. So think about the ways that remembering and forgetting shows up in our lives. How much it describes what we are paying attention to. You know, when someone forgets several appointments they made with you, you get a feeling about how important you are in their lives. On the other hand, if someone is willing to forget an unkind thing that you said, that's a tremendous gift that they've given you. And similarly, when you are holding a resentment and dwelling on it, you're just inflicting pain again and again and again by that act of remembering. On the other hand, probably everyone here can remember some small comment or small action that someone did to us that changed our lives. Someone believing in you when no one else did, or offering you a tool that helped you take a new direction. And what's amazing is that we can flip from constructive ways of doing things to the destructive ways in just blink of an eye, because it's about what we turn our mind's eye to. We choose to pay attention to things. And in that choosing, it becomes what we love and who we are. In theological terms, those things that we pay attention to become part of what's called our internal memory. The memory that lasts into the next life because it reflects our heart's desires. And that's vitally important. Have you ever heard someone who's in recovery say, "My addiction was the best thing that ever happened to me"? If you haven't been there, that seems like a crazy statement. And yet for someone who's been in addiction, to experience this peace and this joy that they had never experienced before that makes that seem insignificant. It's what they choose to pay attention to. I mentioned earlier that a mother's love is the closest natural image that we can have for the Lord's love. And the Lord reminds us of this in the passage we heard in our readings. Can a woman forget her nursing child and not have compassion on the son of her womb? Surely they may forget you, yet I will not forget you. See, I have inscribed you on the palm of my hands. So just as it's hard to imagine a woman forgetting that child she once held and nursed, we need to know and believe that the Lord remembers us. And in fact, He does more, because a woman would sooner forget than the Lord could forget us. That impossible to imagine situation where a woman would forget her child. Even that is the Lord wouldn't do. Now we know that fathers love their children deeply. And yet the Lord doesn't refer to a father's love in this way. We understand that intuitively. In New Church teaching, we're told that women are more connected to love and affection, and men more to understanding and intellect. And it is love that remembers. It's why women so much more obviously express grief when their children make poor choices. Mindfulness or remembering is what we pay attention to, and a mother's love is supremely good at noticing, at paying attention to, at sort of scanning the environment to see how their child is doing. And so we stop to honor women, not just for doing this, but also for providing us with an experience in our lives that is in a small way a mirror that can help us understand the Lord's love for each of us. In Isaiah, we read, "Who is blind as my servant, or deaf as my messenger whom I send? Who is blind as he who is perfect, and blind as the Lord's servant?" And this is a prophecy of the Lord when He came on earth, talking about the Lord as blind and deaf. It's a very striking statement. But in New Church teaching, we're told He's called blind and deaf because the Lord is as if He did not see and perceive the sins of people, for He leads people gently, bending and not breaking, thus leading away from evils and leading to good. Therefore, He does not chastise and punish like one who sees and perceives. So that's the nature of His love. It seeks to find out what is good and draw it out rather than paying attention to or remembering what is wrong. And again, in modern life, the image that best represents that for us is a mother's love. The Lord says, "As one whom his mother comforts, so I will comfort you, and you shall be comforted in Jerusalem." So a mother's love can remind us of the Lord's love, but it can also be a reminder of the ways in which we're supposed to remember the Lord. The Lord always remembers us, but whenever we do what's wrong, well, we kind of forget Him, don't we? The Lord speaks of this in Scripture. In Ezekiel, He says, "You have forgotten me and cast me behind your back." Picture that image of not just turning your back on the Lord, but sort of throwing Him away. That's what we do when we do what's wrong. You can think that there are many things that a child would never do if mom or dad was in the room. And the same is also true of us. There are many things we would never do if we could hold in mind that the Lord is right here, right in this room, in this conversation, even in this internal conversation that I'm having. And that is what our final reading talked about. When we are living spiritually, we are constantly mindful of the Lord. We're even when thinking about or talking about something other than Him, or doing our daily activities. Obviously, nobody is constantly able to think of the Lord in what they do. But one form this takes is that if we're trying to be a good person, there's this part of us that is observing the things that we're doing. And if we do or think anything that goes against what the Lord teaches, it'll twinge. And we call that conscience. And you know that conscience develops. It becomes more and more sensitive to a greater variety of things as you grow. And this is what the Lord means when He says, "You shall remember Jehovah your God, for it is He who gives you power to get wealth, that He may establish His covenant." When we remember the Lord, then He enables us to get blessings. Not earthly blessings necessarily, but the spiritual wealth that He yearns for us to have. And it's this awareness that the Lord is talking about when He says it should be recognized that all evil flows in from hell and all good from the Lord by way of heaven. If a person believed what is really so, I think the instant evil flowed in, that it came from the evil spirits present with him. And since that was what he thought, angels would ward that evil off and repel it. I don't know about you, but I tend to feel inadequate when I read that passage because there's an awful lot of time I think, oh, this is bad, and the angels don't ward it off and repel it because this is describing a very high state of mindfulness or remembering where we bring the Lord into consciousness so much that He is a living awareness in us. He's a living presence in us. I think it's describing something only the highest angels achieve at the state that it's talking about here, but it's something to aspire to. How can I say, whenever I see something, wait, the Lord's here, what would He want me to do? So today we honor our mothers and those who've served as mothers for us. We stop and we remember the good things that they have done, that they have stood for. And we choose to forget the less stellar moments in their lives. We remember and we forget from love. And in doing so, we open ourselves up to experiencing the Lord's constant love for what He does, that He compares to a mother's love, and are reminded of His lack of desire to pay attention to the things that we have done wrong, to dwell on them, but simply to help us take the next step forward. And in doing that, we remind ourselves to remember Him, to develop patterns of paying attention to what is important and rejecting what is not. So for you today and this week, what do you think the Lord would like you to pay attention to remember? What in your life that comes easily to mind would He like you to perhaps forget a little bit more? What do you want to pay attention to so that you can open yourself up to the Lord's infinite love and hope and healing? Can a woman forget her nursing child and not have compassion on the son of her womb? Surely they may forget, but I will not forget you. The Lord has been mindful of us. He will bless us. Amen.